During the golden age of the Lord of the Rings EA games, we had many different games, like the action RPGs of The Two Towers and The Return of the King. We had the real-time strategies of Battle for Middle-earth 1 and 2. We even had a JRPG of the Lord of the Rings The Third Age. But there was one game that I honestly didn't even know existed until sometime within 2025. And this is Lord of the Rings Tactics. A tactics game that was released for the PlayStation Portable that basically followed all of the same rules and regulations that the rest of the EA games did. It was very clear that this game was made during that time period, as a lot of the models were reused during this time. And I thought to myself, well, I've played most of the Lord of the Rings games, why not give this one a try? Now, I do want to talk about one more thing before we really dive into this game. I have never played a tactics game before. I have heard of games like Final Fantasy Tactics, as well as I know that a lot of the Fire Emblem games follow a lot of the same level of the tactics compendium, or whatever word you want to use for it. I don't even know if that's even the right word. But I have never even touched these types of mechanics before. So this is something that is going to be very new for me, and I do want to give kind of my overall thoughts and feelings on the mechanics as we dive into the game. For starters, honestly, I wasn't too surprised to see a few of the things that I did see within this game. The game opens up as pretty much every other EA game did. There was a ton of movie cutscenes that were tied into the events within the game, and once that cutscene was over explaining the movie relevance that each event took place in, then it brought you up to the next level that you would then play through. And the game mechanics itself were pretty simple. There were two phases of combat. You had a movement phase as well as your actual combat phase. You would take your units and you would move them to various places during the movement phase, and then once you hit the combat phase, you would then execute your orders of combat, and your enemy and your units would then use those exact commands to do what needed to be done to help you win the game. Each level was unique in some various aspects where it had a lot of differing objectives. Sometimes you had to capture various flags that you might have to see around the map in order to win the level. Other times you might have to survive for a certain number of turns, and other times it was just simply wipe the enemies out. The game itself also was separated into two different campaigns. There's a good campaign and an evil campaign. For my playthrough, I only really focused on the good campaign. I might go back and play the bad campaign, but I don't honestly know if I will do that, and I'll dive into my thoughts a little bit more on that here in a little bit. Within each of the different units, you also had your heroes that you were playing. Your heroes for the good campaign were your typical Lord of the Rings heroes. You had Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Frodo, and Sam, and then they had a couple of guest heroes that would show up on occasion, with Faramir and Éomer, as well as Boromir showed up for a little bit as well during the events of the Fellowship of the Ring. Overall, my game experience for this, I wouldn't necessarily say was an unpleasant one. I found myself enjoying the time that I had. While I could definitely tell that I had gotten stale with the tactics mechanics, that really is not anything necessarily that I would say is a gripe on the quality of the game. It really is just a proof that the tactics mechanics were not necessarily all for me. If you guys know who I am as a gamer, you know that I usually tend to favor more towards the action RPGs with flashy combat, high-intensity combos that keep going and keep you engaged through that level of combat. It's part of the reason why I have invested hundreds of hours into both The Lord of the Rings The Two Towers and Return of the King, as well as hundreds of hours into the Kingdom Hearts series. The flashy style of combat just really feels good to me. And the tactics game didn't have the flashy combat. It had a lot of big brain plays, so I feel like anybody who really enjoys in-depth strategy games would really enjoy playing through a game like Lord of the Rings Tactics. Now, I'm not going to talk about the story at all, because like I had mentioned, you were just playing through the events of the trilogy, so there really was nothing unique about the story, and since I was already very familiar with the story of the Lord of the Rings, it really didn't need to keep me hooked. I was more here just for playing through the mechanics and the tactics side of things. Now, one of the things that I do really like about the way that Lord of the Ring Tactics had functioned is that there were a lot of things that made each and every individual character unique. They all had different abilities that could either help your allies as well as hurt your enemies, and as long as you were utilizing them well, it would be very easy for you to be able to succeed. And on the same side with the enemies, they had a bunch of debuffs and stuff that ended up being really annoying, which again is exactly what I would expect to have happen for a game like Lord of the Rings Tactics. And so you're not going to have enemies that are just not going to be annoying. That's completely up against the purpose of the entire game. So I'm not going to say that the enemies were too annoying or too unfair, because it honestly added a really pleasant challenge throughout the game. Now, there is one thing that I do want to talk about that does kind of make the gameplay a little bit stale. Since you are playing through the events of the Lord of the Rings movies, you are essentially just playing through all of these key things that would happen in this series. There was the Battle of Amon Hen, the Battle of Helm's Deep, you played through Minas Tirith. There was just a lot of different events that you were playing through in this tactics style. And while I don't think anything was executed poorly, there were a few things that just made it feel really stale. Now, the Lord of the Rings is a vast universe. There are hours upon hours upon hours of content just within the movies alone, and even more when you add the side content that you don't always see off screen. There's so much going on in the movies that it can be really easy to add too much content into a game. And that's honestly what I felt like Lord of the Rings Tactics was sitting at. There were so many things that I was trying to do and trying to just get through the main story, and eventually I completely even forego the side missions because I was just kind of getting to a point where I'm like, I feel like I'm playing just through the same level rehashed out in multiple different forms. Hey guys, post-production Zojalyx here with a quick note because I goobered up in my wording on my script and I apologize for that. But when I was talking about there being so much to do and it felt kind of stale, was more of just like there were a ton of levels to get through, but nothing that really actively changed the way that I played the game. Shoutouts to my dogs, but basically what it was is I was playing through a lot of the same levels, which was movement phase, combat phase, movement phase, combat phase. The only thing that really changed were the characters that are available for me and the goal. So it was just kind of a lot of padding with not a lot of variety. That's what I was trying to get at that. I hope that clears up whatever the heck I just said before and makes it a little bit more interesting and understandable for you guys. Anyways, back to script recorded Zojalyx. That was something that made it a bit less enjoyable for me. I started to get kind of burnt out on playing through just very similar levels and not really having anything that really kept me hooked beyond trying to play this tactic style of game. Now, I definitely think that if we are going to be looking at where this could be a lot more appealing is maybe if I were playing at a higher difficulty. Since this was my first tactics game, I just decided to play it on easy and see what would happen if I were coming at this from a new side of things, which I was. And I didn't want to overly challenge myself because I know that when it comes to a lot of strategy games, I am not very good at them at all. All I really am able to do in strategy games is just do whatever is meta. If I'm playing like Battle for Middle-earth, I usually just turtle until my enemies are super powerful, and then I just go and wipe them out when my troops are really strong. I never really have any distinct way of winning that requires a lot of big brain because I just don't have the skill to be able to come up with those kinds of strategies. And so because of that, I played at an easier difficulty. Now, there were a few times where I did still fail, and I don't necessarily think the game was too easy, but there were a few moments where the game just didn't feel like it was providing that level of intensity to keep me engaged. Now, another thing that I do want to critique about the game is when it comes to the heroes, there were a few times where you had the options to be able to pick the heroes that you wanted to use. And big shocker, Gandalf was the overpowered hero that everybody would want to use. He had healing abilities, he had ranged attacks, he just was such a strong character that if you were doing anything where you could choose a hero, it made literally no sense to not pick Gandalf. If you were to pick anybody else, you would just be purposely making the game a lot harder. And that, to me, was kind of a bit of a design flaw, because in a game like Tactics, where you're wanting to use various units and heroes to make your situation better, it doesn't make your situation better when you can just use Gandalf and it basically secures a win for you as long as you are knowing exactly what it is that you want to do and are just able to abuse his healing ability. Honestly, that healing was so nice to have and allowed me to save a ton of money on items, and I could just focus on attribute upgrades for all of my heroes. So that really is kind of my biggest main gripe in terms of the mechanics, is once again, Gandalf is a bit too overpowered. Now, there's one more thing that I do want to talk about as my final sort of critique, and this one is very, very nitpicky, and it's on the models that were used. So, in the game, it is very clear that they were working very much in close tandem with the other EA Games developers, as there's a lot of animations that are used from both Return of the King and The Third Age, as well as a lot of the models are kept in the same way. Now, I do have one thing that I want to gripe about this. If you are going to be using the same models, why are you going out of your way to put them in the wrong spots? So in Lord of the Rings Tactics, there are a lot of moments where you're playing through events as Gandalf the Grey, where there should be Gandalf the White is there. Or in the Osgiliath level, you're playing as Frodo, which is really cool, but he's in his orc disguise. Like, that decision just didn't make sense to me. Like, I can understand maybe when you're in Mordor putting him in the orc disguise, and honestly, I really liked the look of Frodo in his orc disguise. I genuinely think that that added a really cool amount of depth, and just something I wasn't expecting to see from this game at all, because I don't think we had any other model of Frodo in that orc disguise. So seeing that in this game was really cool. However, it was completely out of place for the events of that level. If we were getting a level in Mordor where we had to sneak by without actually doing anything in combat or something like that, that would be a lot more interesting, and I think that that would have fit a lot better. But for the story of what I was playing through in Osgiliath, that model just didn't make sense. In the same way, that model didn't make sense for Gandalf to be Gandalf the Grey. Also, in a few other areas in that regard, I guess this wasn't my final critique, sometimes the hero placements didn't really make sense. Again, going back to that Osgiliath level, that being the one that was the biggest of the culprits in my playthrough of this game, is that you have Gandalf the Grey as your second hero when Sam is already a hero that you can play with. So why do we not have both Sam and Frodo as the two heroes? Why are we making Gandalf be in a spot where he's not supposed to be? Now, I know a lot of you guys are going to say, well, in Return of the King co-op, you play as Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, and they're not there. Why don't you play as Pippin instead? And honestly, I could even agree with that. But it does make sense for not wanting to reveal a secret character like that. Overall, though, I can say I did have a pleasant experience with Lord of the Rings Tactics. I really just had a few different bits of nitpicking where the gameplay kind of felt a little bit stale after a while, and just some critiques on some of the hero mechanics, as well as the hero placement in some areas and some models. But overall, if you're a fan of Lord of the Rings and you really want to play something that really tests your brain, I would highly recommend playing Lord of the Rings Tactics. I think there are a lot of fun moments that can be derived from this, especially if you are a tactics fan. I am also just excited to see kind of what other strategy games could possibly be implemented. I know that Lord of the Rings: The Third Age on the DS has possible areas of, is like a strategy type game. I've never actually played it, so I can't really say, but I do know that it is like a similar style of tactics. So I would definitely recommend that if you are a fan of tactics games and a fan of Lord of the Rings, that you pick up this game. I genuinely think that you will have a great time with it. I think it will be fun. I think it will provide just another unique way to be able to experience Lord of the Rings content. And yeah, I think that's really about all I have to say on this game. I was thinking about going a little bit more in depth with it, but again, I didn't really want to rehash a bunch of my same critiques over and over again just for the sake of a longer video. That's going to be it for this review, guys. I think if I were to rate this video game out of 10, I would give this a solid 7 out of 10. I think it is a fun game, and there's a few things that I would change, but overall, it's a good time, and I definitely would recommend that you pick it up if you are a tactics fan, and even if you've never played a tactics game before. This is a great game to start off with, so go check out Lord of the Rings Tactics and enjoy that new way of experiencing Tolkien's world. But But that's going to do it for this video here today, guys. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. I do want to give another shout out to all of my Ko-Fi supporters. You are the ones that help to maintain this channel and help to keep it running. So thank you guys again for all that support. A link will be down in the description below to support on Ko-Fi. If you do, you are getting early access to videos, as well as I do plan on doing some fun giveaways and things like that for people who are supporting on Ko-Fi. So make sure you guys go support there down in the description below. But with that, that will be the end of us here today. As always, you are loved, you are valued, you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and we will see you right back here in the next one, everybody.